From the jungles of the Pacific to the beaches of Normandy, America fielded the most diverse and devastating arsenal in history. Fighters, bombers, tanks, warships, submarines, and weapons that literally changed the world. This is every American vehicle and weapon used in World War II. Major fighters, P-40 Warhawk. One of America's most recognizable early war fighters, the P-40 was already in service when Pearl Harbor was attacked. Though outclassed by Japanese Zeros in a straight dogfight, skilled pilots of the Flying Tigers used clever diving tactics to rack up impressive kill ratios over China and Burma. P-38 Lightning. With its unmistakable twin-boom design and twin engines, the P-38 was one of the most versatile aircraft of the entire war. It served as a fighter, bomber escort, photo reconnaissance plane, and ground attack aircraft across every theater. It was the mount of America's top two aces of WWII. P-47 Thunderbolt. Nicknamed the Jug for its enormous barrel-like fuselage, the P-47 was one of the heaviest and most rugged single-engine fighters ever built. Its air-cooled radial engine could absorb tremendous punishment. Late in the war, it became a devastating ground attack aircraft, destroying thousands of German vehicles. P-51 Mustang. Arguably the finest piston engine fighter ever produced. The P-51 Mustang transformed the air war over Europe. Paired with a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, it had the range to escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back, a capability that genuinely changed the course of the strategic bombing campaign. F-4F Wildcat. The Navy's frontline fighter at the outbreak of the Pacific War, the Wildcat was outperformed by the nimble Zero in several respects. Yet through superior tactics, the FAC weave, and sheer pilot determination, Wildcat pilots held the line at Coral Sea, Midway, and Guadalcanal until better planes arrived. F-6F Hellcat. Designed after careful analysis of captured Zero fighters, the Hellcat was built specifically to dominate the Pacific skies. It succeeded spectacularly. With a kill ratio of over 19-1 against Japanese aircraft, the Hellcat became the single most successful naval fighter in history, downing more enemy planes than any other Allied carrier aircraft. F-4U Corsair. Initially considered too difficult to land on carriers due to its long nose, the gull-winged Corsair was handed to the Marines for land-based operations, where it became legendary. Japanese pilots reportedly nicknamed it Whistling Death. It later proved itself as a carrier aircraft in 1944 and beyond. P-39 Airacobra, an unusual design featuring a mid-mounted engine and a 37mm nose cannon, the Airacobra was largely rejected by American and British pilots for high-altitude combat. However, when supplied to the Soviet Union via Lend-Lease, Soviet pilots flying low-altitude missions over the Eastern Front adored it, scoring thousands of kills. P-61 Black Widow, America's first aircraft designed from the ground up specifically as a night fighter. The large twin-engine Black Widow used onboard radar to hunt enemy aircraft in total darkness. Armed with 4 20mm cannons and 4 50-caliber machine guns, it was a formidable hunter over both Europe and the Pacific. P-63 King Cobra, a refined and significantly improved evolution of the P-39. The King Cobra featured better high-altitude performance and enhanced firepower. While the U.S. Army Air Forces used it only limitedly, the Soviet Union received the vast majority of production, over 2,400 units, through Lend-Lease, making it primarily a Soviet weapon. Main bombers, B-17 Flying Fortress. The symbol of America's daylight strategic bombing campaign, the B-17 was a massive, 4-engine heavy bomber, capable of flying at high altitude and absorbing extraordinary battle damage. Crews flew grueling missions deep into Germany. Its defensive armament of 13 50-caliber guns earned it its formidable name, B-24 Liberator. Produced in greater numbers than any other American aircraft in history, the B-24 was the workhorse of the Allied bombing campaign. Its long range made it indispensable in the Pacific and over the Atlantic, hunting submarines. Though less glamorous than the B-17, it carried a heavier bomb load and flew farther. B-29 Super Fortress, the most technologically advanced bomber of the entire war, the B-29 featured pressurized crew compartments, remote-controlled gun turrets, and the ability to fly higher and farther than anything that could intercept it. It firebombed Japanese cities, and ultimately delivered the 2 atomic bombs that ended the Pacific War. B-25 Mitchell, a medium bomber famous for the audacious Doolittle raid of April 1942, when 16 of them launched from a carrier deck to bomb Tokyo, shocking Japan and electrifying American morale. It served in every theater, later modified into a devastating ground attack aircraft bristling with forward-facing cannons. B-26 Marauder. Initially plagued by a notorious reputation for crashes during training, earning dark nicknames. The B-26 ultimately achieved the lowest loss rate of any American bomber in the European theater, once crews learned to handle its demanding, high-speed flight characteristics. It was fast, tough, and highly effective. A-20 Havoc, a nimble, twin-engine attack bomber used for low-level strikes against enemy airfields, supply lines, and troop concentrations. Its speed allowed it to get in and out quickly, before enemy fighters could respond. British and Soviet forces alike, the Havoc was a reliable and effective tactical weapon. A-26 Invader, entering service in 1944 as the replacement for the A-20, the Invader was faster, better armed, and more capable in virtually every way. So effective was its design that it kept serving in Korea and Vietnam long after World War II ended, a testament to how well it was built for the ground attack mission. TBF Avenger, the Navy's primary torpedo bomber, the Avenger had a disastrous combat debut at Midway, losing 5 of 6 aircraft. Yet it rebounded to become the most effective torpedo bomber of the war. Piloted by future President George H.W. Bush, it sank more Japanese shipping than any other aircraft in the Pacific. SBD Dauntless, the dive bomber that turned the tide of the Pacific War. At the Battle of Midway, Dauntless crews sank 4 Japanese fleet carriers in a single morning, one of the most decisive single engagements in naval history. Slow and outdated by war's end, it nonetheless compiled the best kill-to-loss ratio of any U.S. naval aircraft. SB-2C Helldiver, intended to replace the aging Dauntless, the Helldiver was plagued by development problems and initially despised by its crews. Jokes circulated that its designation stood for son of a bitch second class. Despite a troubled beginning, it eventually became the Navy's standard carrier dive bomber through 1945. Transport and utility aircraft, C-47 Skytrain, the military version of the iconic Douglas DC-3 airliner, the C-47 was the backbone of Allied air transport throughout the war. It dropped paratroopers over Normandy and Holland, towed gliders, supplied isolated troops, and evacuated the wounded. Eisenhower personally called it one of the most important tools of victory. C-46 Commando, larger and more powerful than the C-47, the Commando could carry heavier loads at higher altitudes. It was used extensively to fly supplies over the hump, the treacherous Himalayan route supplying China from India, a mission so demanding it destroyed aircraft and crews at alarming rates. C-54 Skymaster, a 4-engine long-range transport derived from the Douglas DC-4 airliner, the Skymaster connected distant theaters and carried high-priority cargo and passengers across oceans. One aircraft, nicknamed the Sacred Cow, served as President Roosevelt's personal transport, carrying him to the Yalta Conference. CG-4 Hadrian, America's primary military glider, the Hadrian was a large, unarmed, wooden and fabric aircraft, towed silently into battle by C-47s. It could carry 13 troops or a jeep and gun crew. Used in Sicily, Normandy, southern France, Holland, and the Rhine crossing, it delivered men and equipment directly onto the battlefield. L-4 Grasshopper. Based on the civilian Piper Cub, the tiny, unarmed L-4 was one of the war's most underrated aircraft. Flying low and slow over the battlefield, its pilots directed artillery fire, spotted enemy positions, and evacuated wounded soldiers. Generals, including Patton, flew them personally to survey the front lines. PBY Catalina, a lumbering twin-engine flying boat that performed some of the war's most heroic work, hunting submarines across the Atlantic, rescuing downed airmen from the Pacific Ocean, and performing long-range maritime patrols. Its crews nicknamed rescue missions Dumbo operations, saving hundreds of lives behind enemy lines. Major tanks. M3 Stuart, America's primary light tank in the early war. The Stuart was fast, reliable, and well-liked by its crews. British forces in North Africa called it Honey for its smooth mechanical performance. Though its 37mm gun struggled against heavier German armor, it excelled in reconnaissance and infantry support roles throughout the war. M3 Lee Grant, a stopgap medium tank, rushed into production after France fell. The Lee mounted a powerful 75mm gun in a hull sponson because no turret ring large enough existed yet. Awkward and tall, it was nonetheless crucial in North Africa, giving Allied tankers a heavy gun when they desperately needed one. M4 Sherman, the absolute backbone of Allied armored power, the Sherman was produced in staggering numbers, over 50,000 units. Renowned for its mechanical reliability and ease of repair, it fought on every front. Its 75mm gun was adequate early in the war, though later variants were upgunned to counter heavier German tanks. M5 Stuart, an upgraded version of the M3, the M5 used twin Cadillac V8 car engines to free up radial engines for aircraft. It retained the 37mm gun, and served effectively in the reconnaissance role throughout Northwest Europe and the Pacific, where its light armor was less of a liability against Japanese opposition. M24 Chaffee, arriving late in 1944, the Chaffee was a quantum leap over the Stuart it replaced. Its 75mm gun, torsion bar suspension, and low profile made it the finest light tank of the war. Though too late to see widespread WWII service, it performed with distinction in Korea and with French forces in Indochina. M26 Pershing, America's belated answer to the Tiger and Panther. The Pershing arrived in Europe in early 1945, with a 90mm gun and thick armor that finally matched German heavy tanks. Rushed to the front in small numbers, it saw limited but significant combat, proving that American engineers could produce a tank equal to Germany's best. M22 Locust, a tiny, 8-ton airborne tank designed to be carried inside gliders and delivered directly onto the battlefield. Armed with a 37mm gun, its thin armor made it highly vulnerable. It saw very limited combat use, primarily with British airborne forces at the Rhine crossing, where its mobility was more valuable than its firepower. Tank destroyers and self-propelled guns. M10 Wolverine, America's first purpose-built tank destroyer, the M10 mounted a 3-inch gun in an open-topped rotating turret on a Sherman chassis. Its doctrine called for it to ambush enemy tanks rather than slug it out head-to-head. Widely used by American and British forces, though its open top left crews exposed to artillery fragments. M18 Hellcat, the fastest tracked armored vehicle of the entire war, the M18 could reach an astonishing 60 miles per hour, fast enough to outmaneuver tanks rather than outfight them. Its 76mm gun was highly effective against most German armor. Small, low, and blindingly quick, it was the perfect embodiment of American tank destroyer doctrine. M36 Jackson developed to counter the heavy German Tiger and Panther tanks that the M10 struggled against. The M36 mounted a powerful 90mm gun, the same caliber as the M26 Pershing. Arriving in late 1944, it gave American tank destroyer battalions the punch they needed to defeat the heaviest Axis armor at range. M7 Priest, a 105mm howitzer mounted on a Sherman chassis, the Priest gave artillery units the ability to keep pace with advancing armored columns. Its pulpit-like 50 caliber anti-aircraft ring gave it its nickname. Widely used by American and British forces, it provided mobile, direct, and indirect fire support throughout the war. M8 Scott, a 75mm howitzer crammed onto a Stuart light tank chassis. The M8 Scott was used as a close support vehicle to provide infantry units with immediate fire support. Too lightly armored for direct tank-on-tank combat, it excelled at blasting fortified positions, pillboxes, and infantry concentrations at close range. M12 Gun Motor Carriage, one of the most powerful self-propelled guns of the war. The M12 mounted a massive World War I-era 155mm cannon onto a modified tank chassis. Used for long-range bombardment of heavily fortified German positions, its devastating shells could level buildings and destroy fortifications from miles away. Major wheeled vehicles. Willys MB Jeep, perhaps the single most iconic vehicle of World War II. The Jeep was ubiquitous across every theater and every role imaginable. It served as a scout car, ambulance, command vehicle, machine gun platform, and supply runner. Generals and privates alike depended on it daily. Eisenhower called it one of America's most important war-winning weapons. Dodge WC Series, a family of rugged 3/4-ton trucks used in dozens of configurations. Weapons carriers, ambulances, command cars, reconnaissance vehicles, and phone line layers. Extremely reliable across all terrain, the Dodge WC Series became the standard utility truck of American and Allied ground forces throughout the war. GMC CCKW, Deuce and a Half. The 2.5-ton GMC cargo truck, universally known as the Deuce and a Half, was the logistical backbone of the entire Allied advance. Hundreds of thousands were built. The famous Red Ball Express used fleets of these trucks, running non-stop day and night to feed Patton's racing army with fuel and ammunition. M3 Half-Track, a hybrid wheeled track vehicle used to transport infantry under partial armor protection. The Half-Track carried a squad of soldiers right up to the edge of the battle, protecting them from shell fragments and small arms. It also served as an anti-aircraft platform, artillery prime mover, and mortar carrier. DUKW, Duck, an amphibious version of the GMC truck. The DUKW could drive off a landing craft, cross the beach, and continue driving inland, bridging the critical gap between ship and shore. It became indispensable at every amphibious landing in the European theater, supplying beachheads that would otherwise have been strangled. LVT Amtrak, the landing vehicle tracked, called the Amtrak or Alligator, was the primary vehicle for storming Pacific beaches. Swimming from ship to shore, under fire, it carried Marines directly into the teeth of Japanese defenses. Later armored variants mounted cannons and provided direct fire support during the assault phase of island landings. M8 Greyhound, a fast six-wheeled armored car used for reconnaissance. The Greyhound was armed with a 37mm gun and could reach 55 miles per hour on roads. Its speed and agility allowed cavalry reconnaissance units to probe enemy lines and report back quickly. Widely used by American and Free French forces throughout Northwest Europe, Scout Car M3A1, an open-topped armored scout car used for reconnaissance and liaison duties. Relatively fast on roads, it protected its crew from small arms and shell fragments while delivering messages, escorting VIPs, and probing enemy positions ahead of the main force. It was largely replaced by the Jeep and M8 as the war progressed. Surface ships. Iowa-class battleship, the largest and most powerful battleships ever built by the United States. The Iowa class mounted 9 16-inch guns, capable of hurling shells weighing as much as a small car, over 20 miles. Fast enough to escort carrier groups, they bombarded shore positions, provided anti-aircraft coverage, and projected overwhelming firepower across the Pacific. Essex-class aircraft carrier, the backbone of America's Pacific offensive. The Essex class carried over 90 aircraft and enough fuel, ammunition, and supplies to project air power across thousands of miles of ocean. Their fast carrier task forces, operating in groups of 4 or more, systematically dismantled Japanese air power and opened the way for island invasions. Fletcher-class destroyer, the workhorse of the U.S. Navy. The Fletcher-class destroyer served in every conceivable role, escorting convoys, screening carriers, shelling beaches, hunting submarines, and rescuing downed airmen. Over 175 were built, making them one of the most numerous warship classes of the entire conflict. Dado-class submarine, the primary fleet submarine that devastated Japanese shipping lanes. Operating deep in enemy-controlled waters, Dado-class submarines sank tankers, freighters, and warships with torpedoes, strangling Japan's ability to supply its island garrisons and fuel its war machine. American submarines sank over 55% of all Japanese shipping lost during the war. PT boats, small, fast, and lightly armed with torpedoes and machine guns. PT boats operated in coastal waters and among Pacific islands, harassing Japanese supply runs. The famous Tokyo Express, PT-109, commanded by a young John F. Kennedy, became one of the war's most celebrated small boat stories after being rammed and sunk by a Japanese destroyer. LST, landing ship tank, a large ocean-going vessel that could drive directly onto a beach and open its bow doors to unload tanks and vehicles directly onto the sand, without any pier or dock needed. Nicknamed Large Slow Target by irreverent sailors, the LST was absolutely essential to every major amphibious operation of the war. LCI, landing craft infantry, smaller than the LST. The LCI could carry about 200 fully equipped troops and discharge them onto a beach via side ramps. Used extensively at Sicily, Normandy, and throughout the Pacific, it gave Allied commanders the ability to land thousands of soldiers simultaneously across a wide beachfront. Smaller and slower than full destroyers, but far cheaper and faster to build. Destroyer escorts were the primary convoy protection vessel of the Atlantic campaign. Armed with depth charges, hedgehog mortars, and sonar, they relentlessly hunted German U-boats, ultimately tipping the Battle of the Atlantic decisively in the Allies' favor. Major submarines, Gato class. The first mass-produced American fleet submarine of the war, the Gato class entered service in 1941 and quickly began wreaking havoc on Japanese merchant shipping. Operating on long patrols deep inside Japanese-controlled waters, they laid mines, landed intelligence agents, and sank ships, fundamentally disrupting Japan's island supply chains. Balao class, an improved version of the Gato with a deeper diving capability due to thicker pressure hull steel. The Balao class arrived in 1943 and became the most numerous American submarine of the war. Its improved depth rating made it significantly harder to destroy with enemy depth charge attacks set for shallower depths. Tench class, the most advanced American submarine to see service in WWII. The Tench class featured improved battery capacity for longer underwater endurance, a streamlined hull, and better habitability for its crew. Entering service in 1944, it pointed the way toward post-war submarine design, with several serving well into the Cold War era. S-class submarine, older, smaller submarines dating from the 1920s that were pressed into frontline service after Pearl Harbor, particularly in the dangerous waters around the Aleutian Islands and Australia. Uncomfortable and technologically outdated, their crews nicknamed them sugar boats, and operated them under grueling conditions until modern fleet submarines took over. Artillery and heavy weapons. M1 105mm howitzer. The standard American field artillery piece of the entire war. The M1 howitzer was lightweight, reliable, and accurate. It could be quickly broken down and moved by truck or mule over rough terrain. Firing a 33-pound shell, it provided the bulk of close-fire support that American infantry divisions depended on daily. M1 155mm howitzer. Long Tom. Nicknamed the Long Tom for its impressive range, this heavy artillery piece could hurl a 95-pound shell nearly 15 miles. Used to destroy fortifications, interdict supply lines, and conduct counter-battery fire against enemy artillery. The Long Tom was the heavy fist of American corps-level artillery throughout the European campaign. M2 4.2-inch mortar. A heavy chemical mortar originally designed to deliver smoke and gas rounds. The 4 deuce was quickly found to be devastatingly effective with high explosive rounds. Its long range and heavy shell made it far more powerful than standard infantry mortars. It provided American infantry with firepower between light mortars and field artillery. M1 81mm mortar, the standard medium mortar of American infantry units. The M1 provided squad and platoon leaders with their own organic indirect fire support. Its crew could drop a shell on a target 100 yards away or nearly 3,000 yards distant. In close, wooded terrain like the Hurtgen Forest, it was often the most effective weapon available. M2 60mm mortar. The lightest mortar in the American infantry arsenal, the 60mm could be carried and operated by a single soldier in a pinch. Its small, lightweight shells could be fired at a rapid rate to suppress enemy positions while infantry maneuvered. Every American rifle company had several, making them one of the war's most ubiquitous infantry weapons. M1 8-inch howitzer, an enormous siege weapon used to reduce the heaviest German fortifications encountered in the Siegfried Line. Firing a 200-pound shell with devastating accuracy at ranges up to 18,000 yards, it was one of the most powerful tube artillery pieces the U.S. Army fielded, capable of destroying reinforced concrete bunkers with direct hits. Major infantry weapons. M1 Garand. General Patton called it the greatest battle implement ever devised, and history largely agrees. The M1 Garand was the world's first standard-issue semi-automatic battle rifle, giving every American infantryman a significant firepower advantage over bolt-action armed German and Japanese soldiers. 8 rounds fired as fast as the trigger could be pulled. M1 Carbine. A lightweight, short semi-automatic rifle issued to officers, vehicle crews, paratroopers, and support troops who needed something smaller than the full-size Garand. Firing a less powerful pistol-like cartridge, it was handy and convenient, but underpowered for longer-range engagements. A trade-off soldiers accepted for its compact size. M1903 Springfield, a bolt-action rifle from World War I that was still in widespread use at the start of WWII due to Garand production shortfalls. Highly accurate and respected by soldiers who knew how to use it, the Springfield was particularly valued as a sniper rifle, serving throughout the war in that precision role. Thompson Submachine Gun, the famous Tommy gun of Prohibition gangster lore, became a standard American military weapon in WWII. Firing .45 caliber pistol ammunition at a high rate, it was devastating at close range in urban combat, jungle fighting, and the confines of landing craft. Heavy and expensive, it was gradually supplemented by the M3 Grease Gun, a cheap, stamped steel submachine gun designed to cost a fraction of the Thompson and be producible by the millions. Soldiers initially mocked its crude appearance, dubbing it the grease gun for its resemblance to a mechanic's tool. Yet it proved reliable and effective, eventually supplanting the Thompson in many roles. M1918 BAR. The Browning automatic rifle was the squad-level automatic weapon that gave American infantry sections their walking fire capability. Firing 30 caliber rifle rounds in full auto bursts, the BAR gunner was one of the most important men in any rifle squad. It was heavy, but provided firepower no bolt-action rifle could match. M1919 Browning, the standard medium machine gun of American infantry and armored units. The water-cooled M1919 could fire hundreds of rounds per minute from a fixed or vehicle-mounted position. Reliable to a fault, it equipped everything from infantry squads to jeeps, half-tracks, bombers, and fighter aircraft throughout the entire war. M2 Browning 50 cal, perhaps the most successful machine gun ever designed. The M2 Modus was used on aircraft, tanks, half-tracks, ships, and ground mounts. Its massive 50 caliber rounds could destroy light vehicles, aircraft, and fortifications. Extraordinarily reliable and hard-hitting, it remains in active service today, over 80 years after World War II. a shoulder-fired rocket launcher that gave ordinary infantrymen the ability to destroy tanks, bunkers, and fortifications. The distinctive whoosh of its rocket became one of the defining sounds of the war. German engineers were so impressed after capturing one that they developed their own version, the much larger Panzerschreck. M1 Flamethrower, a terrifying weapon used primarily in the Pacific to clear Japanese soldiers from fortified bunkers, tunnels, and cave systems that were otherwise nearly impossible to take. The operator carried tanks of pressurized fuel on their back, making them both effective and extraordinarily vulnerable to enemy fire. M7 Grenade Launcher, a rifle grenade launcher that attached to the M1 Garand's muzzle, converting it into a grenade launcher capable of hurling explosive, smoke, and anti-tank grenades up to 300 yards. It gave infantry squads a standoff capability against light vehicles and fortified positions without requiring a dedicated grenadier. Bombs and Special Weapons, A&M Series General Purpose Bombs, the standard family of aerial bombs dropped by American aircraft throughout the war, ranging from 100-pound to 2,000-pound weights. Filled with TNT or Torpex explosive, they were used against everything from bridges and factories to warships and troop concentrations, the workhorse munitions of the entire strategic bombing campaign. An M69 Incendiary Bomb, a small hexagonal firebomb filled with napalm, designed specifically to set fire to Japanese cities built largely of wood and paper. Dropped in clusters of 38 per canister, a single B-29 could scatter hundreds of them across a city block. The firebombing campaign caused more destruction than almost any other weapon of the Pacific War. Mark 13 Aerial Torpedo, the standard American air-drop torpedo, launched from Avenger aircraft against Japanese warships and merchant vessels. Early versions were plagued by catastrophic failures, running too deep, failing to explode, or exploding prematurely. After determined investigation and fixes by 1943, it became a reliable and devastating anti-ship weapon. Little Boy, Mark I, the uranium gun-type atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, by the B-29 Enola Gay. Equivalent to approximately 15,000 tons of TNT, it destroyed 5 square miles of the city in seconds and killed between 70,000 and 80,000 people instantly. It was the first nuclear weapon ever used in combat. Fat Man Mark III, the plutonium implosion-type atomic bomb dropped on Nagasaki on August 9, 1945. More powerful than Little Boy at approximately 21,000 tons of TNT equivalent, it killed an estimated 40,000 people instantly. Together, the two atomic bombings brought Imperial Japan to the surrender table within days. Mark 24 Fido, officially called the Mark 24 Mine, but actually an acoustic homing torpedo. Fido was airdropped near submerged German U-boats and homed in on the sound of their propellers. It was the first operational guided weapon used by American forces, transforming anti-submarine warfare and causing significant losses among U-boat crews. Landing Crafts LCVP, Higgins boat. Designed by Andrew Higgins of New Orleans, the flat-bottomed landing craft vehicle personnel was the vessel that put troops ashore at every major Allied amphibious operation of the war. Eisenhower famously said, "Higgins won the war for us." The Higgins boat's ability to land anywhere without a dock was a strategic revolution. LCM, Landing Craft Mechanized, a larger steel landing craft capable of carrying a single tank or several vehicles directly onto a beach. The LCM was essential for getting armor ashore in the critical first hours of an amphibious assault, when landing beaches were at their most dangerous and the need for armored fire support was most acute. LCT, Landing Craft Tank. Even larger than the LCM, the LCT could carry multiple tanks and heavy vehicles and drive them directly onto a beach ramp. Used at Normandy, in the Pacific, and throughout the Mediterranean, it was a critical link in the complex chain of logistics that made Allied amphibious operations possible. LSD, Landing Ship Dock, an innovative ship with a large floatable well deck in its stern that could carry and launch landing craft, small boats, and even LCTs from its interior. By flooding the well deck, the LSD could float its cargo out the back and deploy them for a beach assault, essentially a mothership for landing craft.